Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to make an amazing ruby chocolate mousse cake, or as it's called in French, an entremet. The first layer in this entremet is the raspberry jelly, and this starts with 2 gelatin sheets hydrated in ice cold water. In my bowl I have 100 grams of seedless raspberry puree and 10 milliliters of agave syrup. I'm heating this in the microwave and then I'm adding the gelatin. Make sure you squeeze out the excess water. You'll notice that the puree becomes very glossy. Now pour this puree into a 14 cm square silicone mold and tilt it so it reaches into all corners. Then, tap it against your work surface to release the big air bubbles. Let it sit at room temperature for 15 minutes and then freeze it for at least 2 hours. The next layer in my entremet is the financier, and this starts with 80 grams of ruby chocolate and 40 grams of butter. I'm gradually melting them in the microwave. Don't let the intervals be longer than 5 or 6 seconds or you risk burning the chocolate. Stir very well after each interval in the microwave. When you notice that there are only tiny bits of chocolate left, it's no longer necessary to microwave the ganache. Just keep stirring it until it's perfectly homogeneous. And then add 15 grams of raspberry puree and 2 milliliters of lemon juice. These ingredients are very important and they're necessary to maintain the natural color and flavor of ruby chocolate. Stir the raspberry puree in until you have a deep pink ganache and then just leave the bowl aside for now. While the ruby chocolate ganache goes down a bit, beat 2 egg whites until they're frothy. We're not making a meringue here, so don't overbeat the whites. When you have a somewhat frothy consistency that looks like this, you're good to go. Add the ruby ganache to the whites and mix very well with a whisk. Would you look at that color? How beautiful is that? And while I do this, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. You see, 97% of you guys aren't subscribed to my channel, and my goal is to bring that percentage down. So thank you for helping me do this by subscribing. It really means a lot to me. Then switch to a silicone spatula and fold the mixture a few times just to make sure that it's homogeneous. Scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. In another mixing bowl, combine 20 grams of erythritol with 40 grams of almond flour and 20 grams of cake and pastry flour, and then add the pink, egg white and chocolate mix. Combine everything with the whisk. This is a batter that comes together very easy, so don't overmix. And when you see that you have a homogeneous mixture, switch back to the spatula to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. Just give the batter a few folds and then get it into a 16 cm square silicone mold. Lift and drop the mold on your work surface a couple of times to help spread the batter, and then take a small offset spatula and level it. Make sure you push it into the corners. Now bake the ruby chocolate financier in a preheated oven at 160 Celsius for 25 minutes. And then let it cool down to room temperature in the mold. When it's at room temperature, it's safe to take the financier out. Just cover the mold with a board and then invert it. The cake just falls onto the wooden board, no damage whatsoever. And now you can see why it was necessary to spread it into the corners with the spatula. A perfect square. Freeze the ruby financier and let's move on to the crémeux. And my ruby chocolate crémeux starts with 1 gelatin sheet hydrated in ice cold water In my double bottom pot, I have 70 grams of raspberry puree, 5 milliliters of lemon juice, 10 milliliters of agave syrup, 2 egg yolks, and to these I'm adding 15 grams of xylitol. Take a whisk and mix everything very well. Then add 50 milliliters of whipping cream and continue mixing until your mixture is homogeneous. If the whipping cream was cold, it'll thicken a bit, but don't worry. Now take the pot to the stove and on the smallest flame, mix continuously until your mixture reaches 82 degrees Celsius. We're basically making a raspberry crème anglaise. It's best if you use a kitchen thermometer just to make sure. As soon as you reach this temperature, remove the pot from the heat. Keep mixing it for a minute or two off of the heat and then add the hydrated gelatin. Mix a little until the gelatin dissolves and then add 140 grams of ruby chocolate. Stir gently until the chocolate melts completely. And even though you see me doing this on the stove, remember the heat is off. Let the crémeux cool down a bit. And while that happens, it's time to take out the frozen jelly from its mold and move it into a bigger mold, this time a 16 cm square silicone mold. To do this, pull at the sides of the mold first and then push against the corners on the other side. Then pull the frozen jelly out. Be very careful and work fast. It's best if you use disposable rubber gloves here because you don't want to melt the jelly. Now place it into the center of the bigger mold with the shiny surface down. Press it gently with your fingers so it sticks a little to the silicone. And now immediately pour the ever so slightly warm ruby crémeux over the frozen jelly. Shake the platter on which the mold sits to level the crémeux and to make sure it reaches into the corners. It's also helpful to remove the bigger air bubbles which will rise to the surface. Now that they're on the surface, just use a toothpick to pop those. By now the ruby chocolate crémeux is cold and starts to set, so you can take it to the freezer. Freeze it for at least 4 hours. After the time has passed, it's time to move the crémeux and the jelly into an even bigger mold, this time an 18 cm square silicone mold. And you have to proceed the same way, so pull from the sides of the mold to release the crémeux, and then lift the mold and push from underneath right into the corners to release the frozen crémeux and jelly. Once you've released the crémeux, you can pull from the sides of the mold and with your other hand remove the square from it. Now place the frozen inserts jelly side down right into the middle of the bigger mold and press it gently to make sure it sticks a little to the silicone. Just a little warmth from my hands and you can see it already starts to melt, so work fast. The crémeux is very delicate, so don't press too hard. And don't worry, those finger marks won't show on the cake, they'll be on the inside. Now put the bigger mold on the platter and return it to the freezer until you're ready to assemble the cake. To make the ruby chocolate mousse, we're gonna have to start with 3 gelatin sheets hydrated in ice cold water. And here I have 250 milliliters of very cold whipping cream that I'm whipping by hand to a very soft peak. The cream has to be pourable. It should hold the trail, but it has to be fluid enough so you can pour it. Set it aside for now. In my pot I have 25 milliliters of agave syrup and to that I'm adding 15 milliliters of lemon juice, followed by 70 grams of seedless raspberry puree. And to this, I'm adding 150 milliliters of cold whipping cream. Mix everything very well until your mixture is homogeneous, and don't worry if it thickens. It'll melt when you heat it. Take the pot to the stove and on the smallest flame, while stirring at all times, heat it to 60 degrees Celsius. Turn the heat off and then add the hydrated gelatin. Mix it in and you'll notice that the mixture becomes shiny and glossy. Then add 150 grams of ruby chocolate and let it sit for a minute or two. After a minute or two have passed, start stirring the chocolate gently and you'll notice that you obtain a deep pink, beautiful glossy cream. When the ganache is slightly warm to the touch, add about a third of the softly whipped cream. This will melt part of the cream, giving the mousse an even silkier finish. Use the whisk to mix everything together. Again, it's best if you work fast here because as you cool it, the gelatin will start to set. When your mixture is homogeneous, pour it right over the remaining whipped cream. Continue mixing with the whisk very fast until the mousse is homogeneous. Then it's time to switch to the silicone spatula to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl and remove some of the bigger air bubbles. To ensure that your mousse is as smooth and as delicate as possible, it's always best if you finish with a spatula. Mixing like this, fast and in small circles on the bottom of the bowl, removes most of the big air bubbles. Then scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl once again and you're done. As you can see, the mousse is quite fluid, almost like a cream. And this is exactly what I wanted. And now it's time to assemble the cake. Just make sure you have everything in place before you pour the mousse. Pour the mousse first into the corners and the sides of the mold, and this way you'll avoid creating big air bubbles. However, if you think that your mousse is a bit too thick and that you might have bubbles between the mold and the cake, run a soft silicone spatula between the crémeux and the sides of the mold to release that air pocket. After you scrape the bowl, shake the platter on which the cake sits to bring the air bubbles on the surface. Make sure you don't skip this step. Use a toothpick to burst the big air bubbles that rose to the surface. Now take the frozen financier base, flip it so you have the top facing you and very carefully drop it right in the middle of the mousse. You'll notice that it sinks a little, but that's not enough. You're gonna have to level it with your fingers. Gently push the base down with both hands until it's level with the mousse. By now, the mousse is starting to set because it's trapped between two frozen layers. Now shake the platter briefly just to level the mousse that's around the base, and then take the ruby chocolate entremet to the freezer. It'll have to stay there for at least 8 hours. Now to make the sugar-free neutral glaze we need for this entremet, we're gonna need 6 gelatin leaves. And you have to hydrate them in ice-cold water. Set the gelatin aside and while it hydrates, let's make the syrup that's the base for this glaze. In my double bottom pot, I have 100 milliliters of agave syrup and to that, I'm adding 200 milliliters of water and immediately afterwards 20 milliliters of lemon juice. Add 100 grams of xylitol, turn the heat on and stir gently until you have a transparent liquid. Once the xylitol has dissolved, there's no need to stir anymore. Let the syrup come to a full boil and keep it on the flame until it reaches 103 degrees Celsius. This temperature is necessary to reduce some of the water and thicken it just a little bit. Then cut the heat and let it cool down to 60 degrees Celsius. When the syrup reaches this temperature, it's safe to add the gelatin. Squeeze out the excess water and add the hydrated gelatin leaves to the hot syrup. Stir gently to avoid creating big air bubbles, and you'll notice that the gelatin dissolves in no time at all. Strain the glaze into a cup that makes it easy for you to pour from, and then cover it with plastic wrap directly on the surface to avoid it from forming a skin. Let it sit like this until it reaches 32 degrees Celsius. You're gonna have to take the temperature every now and then. Okay, so it's time for the big reveal. Let's take out the cake. Carefully pull from the sides of the mold to release the walls of the cake. Turn it around and repeat the process. And try to pull from as close as the corners as possible to loosen them too. Then take the cake into a hand and with the other one release a corner. Just pull down and you'll see that it releases very easily. That's the beauty of working with these professional silicone molds. I can only recommend you get one. And this is it. Here it is. No broken corners. Now place the ruby chocolate entremet on an inverted bowl that sits on a large plate. If you don't have a plate that's large enough, simply line your work surface with plastic wrap. Pour the glaze when it's at 30 or 32 degrees Celsius, not colder and not warmer. Start with the sides and the corners and then cover the center. If you pour it at 35 degrees, it'll be too thin. If you pour it at 28 degrees, it'll be too thick. Trust me, I tried both ways and no. 30, 32 is the sweet spot. And speaking of spots, if you missed one when you poured the glaze, just take a pastry brush, dip it in the glaze, and brush that spot very gently. And this trick doesn't work if you pour the glaze below 30 degrees Celsius. You just make some unsightly gelatin blobs. And while the glaze in the plate is still very fluid, turn the cake around and look at it very carefully. Well, luckily, that was the only spot I missed. Then use a small spatula to remove the excess glaze drippings from the bottom of the cake. And now it's time to move it to the serving platter. I like to do this with two large offset spatulas. Lift both hands at the same time and put the cake on the platter. Then carefully turn and pull each spatula to the side. And simply pull one of them away. Then, with a small spatula, push against the sides of the cake and pull the other spatula from underneath. And that's it. Now let the entremet thaw in the fridge for at least 6 hours before you serve it. And this is how you make this stunning ruby chocolate entremet with no added sugar. See you next time, dessert lovers!